Thank you. I need a little tea before I started. Thank you for the beautiful music, much appreciated, and folks for your testimony. Our hearts are moved, and I know that's what we're going to remember from today. We may be going right to fellowship time. No. There we go. On January 27th, 1700, the seismologists in Japan were keeping watch. You know that island nation is very, very familiar with earthquakes and tsunamis. When there was an earthquake hundreds of years ago, the same as now, alarms would go off because people would have a very limited time to run to the hills to save themselves. But what was unusual about this January 27th was a tsunami came out of nowhere with no earthquake warning and inundated the hills, and lives were lost. And afterwards, this was recorded in a very puzzled fashion. How could there be such a huge tsunami without an earthquake to precede it? The earthquake shakes and trembles. The plates move. One plate moves under another, these huge continental plates. The water is drawn away. And then that water has to come back. A giant mountain of water returns to the shore. And there is no arguing with that water. Anyone caught in what is called the induction zone will die. There is no surviving it. Well, about this time, about a century later, Lewis and Clark set forth on their journey across the country, across the American continent. And they were the first to observe that there were places on the West Coast where an enormous number of trees had died, with saltwater pools well inland. And eventually, when scientists began to correlate the stories of Native Americans with the evidence, it was clear. The earthquake happened near the western coast. And while the tsunami that hit Japan 10 hours later was enormous, the one on the west coast destroyed enormous amounts of life. And because it was preserved in Native American stories, it was not at first noticed by the Westerners. This is the Cascadia subduction zone. There will not be a test later, so you don't have to remember. What I do want you to remember is every 300 years or so, there's a 9.0 earthquake or something in that nature. The worst I've ever been in is 6.2. We cannot imagine what a 9.0 earthquake is like. But now, when it happens, it may be the worst natural disaster that ever hits the United States, and it's due. It's time. Imagine as you look at the picture, this is from the Washington coast, that climbing this hill will not be high enough to save you. When water traveling 100 miles an hour sweeps you, it doesn't need to be 5 feet higher than this. It only needs to be a few inches higher than that to sweep you away. So recently, different communities are looking. Do they have an escape route? Will they give the alarm? Will there be enough time? Which brings us to the small town of Seaside, Oregon. Seaside, Oregon is in the almost exact middle of this area that stretches from southern Canada to northern California. Obviously, with the name Seaside, it's on the ocean side. It's a tourist town. The population swells for part of the year and then begins to recede. But For the year-round residents, 85% of them live or work in the zone that will be engulfed. And if the earthquake happens during school hours, 100% of the children will die. First of all, because the school buildings are not retrofitted so that they will remain standing after an earthquake. They will collapse. So once the earthquake happens, school officials will have 10 minutes to move all the school children 1.5 miles up to a hill. The bridge will not be able to withstand the earthquake. The ground will liquefy, and the kids will be under rubble. Well, Doug Doherty, the school superintendent, in 2014, helped to sponsor a bill that would raise taxes, build a new school high enough and far enough from the coast that it could not only save the children a K-8 school to replace the 3 schools they had, but also serve as a disaster center for the general population. It would cost every resident an extra $2.16 on a $1,000 valuation on their property. This was in 2014. It was defeated by around 65% to 35%. Doug Doherty retired. He and his wife decided that though they could move and be safe, they would remain in the induction zone. Perhaps they would climb a tree, they thought. They didn't know what they could do to save themselves, but they would not put themselves in a safe situation while the children were in danger. Because the warning is there, something will happen, and they were not prepared. This year, he put it on the ballot again. Jesus, in this passage, tells the people that though everything looks solid, as they stand in this beautiful temple, one of the wonders of the ancient world, in awe at the beautiful stones embedded into the walls and the columns, that it's not safe. That there will come a time when not one stone is standing on another. Needless to say, they want to know, well, how are we going to know? When will it happen? Jesus gives them an answer, even though he doesn't. They want to know a month at a time, and he says, you know, there's going to be signs, there's going to be earthquakes, there's going to be signs in the heaven, there's going to be nations at war against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms. And then he says, that won't do you any good. That's not the sign. But you yourself will be persecuted. That family members will turn in other family members to save themselves. As he says, but I will give you words of wisdom. You know, this is a major reality check. A major reality check. Simply to be prepared. Are you ready today? Do you have your ducks in a row for the great return of Jesus? Jesus assures us that there will be a great and difficult time of persecution and alarm, and that it is up to us to be ready. And each one of us, we hope, will look to themselves, first of all, to be ready, but just as the former superintendent of Seaside, Oregon, could have set himself apart and say, thank heavens I'm safe. Just as many Christians say, okay, I've accepted Jesus. Woo! Now I'm going to go over here, and the heck with the rest of you. There are people that take delight in thinking about those who will fail to measure up. There are people who take delight in those who are lost, whose favorite part of books about the end is thinking about the ones that don't measure up. But are you going to stay with God's people and through the witness of your words and your life, make it clear that we're all in this together? That salvation is not individual, but it's for all of us as a group. Like the hymn says, when we all come together, what a great day of rejoicing it will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Not when I see Jesus, but when we see Jesus. The very last verse I want to retranslate of this passage. Verse 19. The ones that endure, in your endurance, you will not lose your, some translations say soul, but it's a funny word, psuche, from which we get the word psyche. Psuche. It could be your soul, but it's also your personality, who you are. Will you lose your personality? Will you lose the core of your being by turning your back on your neighbors, by refusing to see their suffering? Will you lose the core of your personality by saying, I got mine? Because that may be the greatest delusion of all. If you think you got yours at the expense of everybody else, you've got nothing. The message of salvation is for all of us. God is a greedy God who wants us all. And there's the big reality check. A lot of times we're smug. Whew. It's me. I'm safe. But we're not safe unless all of us are safe. Those who endure, in your endurance, your personality will withstand. Your personality will stand. Even when the storms of life rage around you and threaten to knock you off your feet. Well, I said, and I didn't, although I wrote this a while back, I didn't know what happened with the ballot in Seaside, Oregon this year. The bill came back. The amount that people would have to pay was lessened a little bit. Weyerhaeuser, the lumber company, donated some land up higher, but it was still an expensive proposition. And on Tuesday, it passed 2/3 to 1/3. They're not out of the woods yet. All we know is every 300 years or so, there's been an earthquake, a 9.0 earthquake, and a tsunami. And right now, the clock is ticking at 316 years. But at least now they're taking steps. Folks, the clock is ticking. If we expect that we will look upon the day of the Lord with joy because we're okay, we're not okay. We've got to have all of those who are struggling with us. We've got to have all of those who haven't heard yet with us. We've got to have our silent sufferers who are despairing with us. Then our psuche, our personality, our soul will stand fast no matter what storms we have to withstand. Then all will be well. Amen. Thanks for your patience there.